Welcome to This Explainer. If you work in MEAL, monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning, you already know that managing different donor requirements can literally feel like trying to speak 5 different languages at the exact same time. It's exhausting, right? Well, today, we're going to fix that. We're looking at standardizing our internal measurement frameworks using a really powerful tool called the AAYAN 7-level Functional Interpretation Model. By the end of this explainer, you're going to have a highly practical guide to cut right through that bureaucratic noise and focus on what actually matters, which is your functional impact.
Here is a quick look at our agenda for today. We're going to cover the donor terminology trap, check out some specific results frameworks, dive into the accountability gradient, unpack the AAYAN 7-level model itself, apply its 5 steps, and finally, look at multi-donor realities. All right, let's get right to work.
Section 1. The donor terminology trap and avoiding the pitfalls of direct translation. So let's start with a massive headache that every single grant writer, MEAL director, and project manager faces at some point: the really dangerous trap of blindly translating donor vocabularies.
Take a look at this comparison. On the top, we've got the European Commission's specific objective, and down on the bottom, USAID's intermediate result. Now notice those big red X's? That's because similar-looking donor terms are not always equivalent. You simply cannot take an EC-specific objective, translate it word for word into a Global Affairs Canada intermediate outcome, and just assume they mean the same thing. There is no way. They are functionally entirely different levels of change, and they're shaped by totally different reporting standards. Which brings us to a golden rule of MEAL frameworks. Seriously, if you take one thing away today, let it be this: always interpret, then map, never translate blindly. Different definitions inherently mean different levels of change. If you just do a one-to-one word translation, you are risking misaligning your entire project theory, and that's going to lead to major reporting failures down the line.
Moving into Section 2, Selected Results Frameworks. Just how big is this terminology problem really? Let's navigate the vocabulary of some of the world's major global development organizations.
Look at the sheer variety across these rows. Across organizations like FCDO, USAID, the World Bank, and the EC, you've got vastly different structural layers. For example, USAID historically uses sub-intermediate results and intermediate results, while the EC goes with specific and general objectives. The naming conventions are completely all over the place. But here's the secret: the functional logic of change, running from left to right, remains entirely consistent. We just need a reliable way to map it out.
Section 3 is the accountability gradient, distinguishing between control and influence. Before we can start mapping that terminology, we have to shift our mindset toward the fundamental nature of results themselves. We absolutely need to separate what our programs control from what they merely influence. Keep this incredibly simple contrast in mind. On one side, you have what you explicitly control. These are the inputs you buy, the activities you run, and the direct deliverables you produce. On the flip side, you have what you merely influence. This is stuff like changes in partner capacity, shifts in human behavior, and ultimate end outcomes. You manage the first group, but the second group? Actually, scratch that. You don't manage them. You can only facilitate them.
Let's look at how this builds out visually. See that blue control column on the left? That represents your direct management, levels 1 through 3, your resources, actions, and deliverables. It is completely safe to claim control here. But as we move into that green shared influence column right in the center, this is where you're facilitating initial capacity changes and behavioral shifts. You can support these, absolutely, but you cannot force them. Understanding this gradient is absolutely crucial for setting realistic claims and designing much better MEAL systems.
All right, Section 4, the AAYAN 7-level model, the universal translator for MEAL professionals. This is the aha moment, folks. If we understand our sphere of control versus influence, how do we standardize terminology internally? We use the AAYAN model.
So what is it? The AAYAN 7-level functional interpretation model is exactly this: a practitioner-oriented guide to help interpret results, terminology across selected development frameworks. Think of it as your functional crosswalk. It acts as a universal translator for all your complex donor requirements, taking the guesswork totally out of the equation. Let's walk up the pyramid, starting right at the bottom with the red base. Here we have context, assumptions, and risks. Moving up, we invest inputs to perform activities to deliver outputs. Now that right there is our sphere of control. Then we cross the line into our outcomes. Level 5 is outcome, changes in behavior or capacity.
Level 6 is the broader development objective. And sitting right at the top, Level 7 is impact, the ultimate societal-level change in people's lives. This structure tells us what function each tier represents, regardless of whatever random label a donor happens to slap on it.
But, a pyramid doesn't just stand on its own without a solid foundation. These cross-cutting considerations you see here, like learning and adaptation, value for money, sustainability, equity, risk, evidence quality, and partnerships, these aren't just corporate buzzwords. They sit at the very base of the AAYAN pyramid, and they absolutely must be applied across every single level of your intervention.
Section 5. Applying the 5 steps. Translating theory into practice. Theory is great, right? But we are practitioners. So, how do we actually use this in our daily, on-the-ground meal work? Let's get into some highly instructional, practical application. The secret here is following this 5-step workflow sequentially. Step 1, read and understand the donor's official framework. Step 2, identify the specific change happening. Step 3, interpret that function using the AAYAN model. Step 4, design your indicators based on that interpreted function. And Step 5, and this is so vital, report using the donor's language. Let me echo that golden rule again. Interpret by function internally, but strictly report in their language externally. Let's look at how steps 1 and 2 actually work in practice. If you get a label like, say, health workers completed training, you have to ask yourself 2 diagnostic questions following the arrows on the right. First, is this describing delivery or is it describing change? And second, how directly can the intervention manage or influence it? If the result is just training delivered, well, that's delivery. But if it's knowledge improved or practice changed, now we're talking about functional change. If you can't identify the nature of the change, you literally cannot accurately map the result. Step 3 introduces a really strict diagnostic formula. A valid outcome statement absolutely must identify who changes, what changes, and, where needed, where it happens. For example, training conducted is a failed outcome statement. It's just an output because it completely lacks a specific actor and a specific change. Conversely, health workers apply IMCI protocols in District X is a valid behavioral outcome. It hits the who, the what, and the where perfectly. Once you've got the function dialed in, Step 4 is where the AAYAN model saves you massive amounts of time. You might have Framework A talking about health workers demonstrating improved safe delivery knowledge, while Framework B talks about farmers demonstrating improved knowledge of climate-smart practices. Despite entirely different donor origins, they funnel perfectly into one unified green box, initial capacity change. You measure the function internally, meaning you've just standardized your data collection across multiple grants. But here is where we need a heavy dose of reality for Step 5. Look at that warning icon. Never, ever use Global Affairs Canada terminology in a USAID proposal. Donors audit against their own specific frameworks. So for your internal design and learning, absolutely use the neutral AAYAN 7-level functional chain. But for contractual documents and log frames, you must strictly preserve the commissioning donor's required vocabulary. Internal interpretation equals understanding, external donor terms equal legal compliance. Section 6, Navigating Multi-Donor Realities and Standardizing Internal Measurement. Let's bring this all together now. How does the AAYAN model actually function in the messy, real-world environment of complex, multi-donor funding structures?
If you look at the left side of this diagram, you see multiple donor log frame requirements. FCDO, USAID, the EU. They are tangled, they're messy, and they use totally different terminology. But when you pass them through the unified functional MEL framework, our AAYAN crosswalk in the center, you easily identify the overlaps. Emerging on the right side, you have streamlined, standardized data. You collect the raw MEL data once internally based on function, and then you can confidently report it externally to multiple donors in their respective mandated vocabularies. It's a real game changer. Which leads us perfectly to the core philosophy of the AAYAN model. Different words, same purpose, greater impact. Bureaucratic vocabulary shouldn't distract us from the work we do. Whether a donor calls it an intermediate result, a specific objective, or an outcome, the ultimate functional goal remains the exact same, driving lasting, positive change in society. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with a tough question to consider as you head back to your log frames and indicator tracking tables today. Are your internal MEL systems truly tracking functional impact, or are you just blindly translating donor terminology? It might be time